morning, everybody. Everyone got themselves a cup of tea? I've got a green tea going. Looking forward to enjoying that with you guys. And I recommend a pen and paper if you don't have one with you, and then get yourself comfortable somewhere where you can enjoy the talk. We're going to do a little bit of movement at the end as well. I like to do a wee bit of practice with you today, so have a space somewhere that you can move around comfortably, and we'll get to that near the end of the session. All right, should we get started, everybody? Cool, so welcome. We've got people in the room here today from all over the world, which is great. We've got a big group coming on board. I know there's some of you that have registered that won't be able to be here for the live talk, so we are recording all of this. And if there's any problems with it, if there's any glitches on the internet or whatever like that, we've got a nice smooth recording that we'll share with you guys at the end once it's all tidied up. So let's get into it and have a wee look at what we're going to be doing today. So first things first, I'll just get your guys' permission to try and keep it inside 45 minutes, but the reality is I'll probably get a little bit excited once we start talking about this, and I'll try and keep it as a nice general introduction, but if I do get carried away, I'm sorry about that, and hopefully we'll sort of get it done within an hour or so. There is a chat room live as well, so you guys can chat to each other, have a wee talk. Melissa's sitting in there, so she can give you guys feedback. Feel free to ask questions and things in there today. We won't do a Q&A, but I am really interested to hear what you guys are thinking, what you want to know, and that might lead us on to the further sort of talks and how we might go about doing these. So jump on in there, have a chat, say hi to each other. I think some of you will know each other, some of you won't. We've got people here from the Wairarapa Neuromedtec client base, which is cool. So hi to you guys. It'll be a bit weird for you to see me in my teaching personality, but that's okay, bit different to clinic. We've got people here from the Forest Rock Qigong community, so hey to all you guys. Love you all dearly. And we've got a whole heap of people that we just don't know as well that have just come on board. So hi to those people that have never met me before. My name's Pete. And I'm the medical director at Neuromedtec, and what we're going to do today is we're going to talk specifically about medical movement therapy. What is it? How did I come up with this program? Where did I inherit it from, and what have I turned it into? And how we can utilize this specifically for mental health and well-being, which is a huge sort of issue that we've got going on, and I think that we need to really look at the medicine cabinet within us as opposed to outside of us to resolve some of these issues and give ourselves a good, healthy and resilient nervous system. So what are we going to do today? We're going to have a look at the history. So just a quick chat about how on earth did we come up with this and where it sort of comes from. Then I want to talk briefly about development. What have we turned this into and how are we developing this, particularly in the context of our research into bioelectric signatures and how we can generate these things with things like breath and movement. Going to have a quick chat about applications, so how I've utilised this in my clinical environment over the years, class environments, and how you might be able to utilise it, what it's good for, that sort of stuff. Then we're going to go just a little bit into some cool neuroscience stuff. I do want to talk briefly about respiratory vagus nerve stimulation. The courses that we've got up on our online therapy program at the moment, the advanced course is pretty dedicated to this subject and how we can use that to biohack our nervous system for health and well-being. This is an area that I've got a real passion for, and I'm looking forward to giving you guys just a wee just put your toe in the water just briefly on that subject because it's a real good one. Just a quick chat about our online therapy programs, how they work, what you need to do with them, how to practice them and build them up and get them functional. And I'll also talk a little bit about our long-term plans for developing this and giving us more time together so that we can really understand how to utilize neuroscience to empower the practice of Qigong. And then finally, we're going to finish off with a little practice today. I think it'll be a really good idea for us just to do a wee bit of Qigong together because that's what we're here to talk about. And ultimately speaking, what I want to do with that is finish the class in silence today. So what we're going to do is go to the practice at the end, we'll do the movements together, and then I'll guide you to spend some time in silence after that, so you can really tune into your nervous system and see how this might work for you. So hopefully that's a good quick overview, and ultimately speaking, some of the stuff that we get into might just shoot over the top of the head a little bit, but don't worry, this is really just an opportunity to introduce medical movement therapy to you, and certainly we've got a lot of content coming, so you can go deep into that in your own time. Okay, I'm just going to have a sip of my tea, just keep the vocal cords lubed up, and we'll get going. Okay, so first part, history. How on earth did we come up with this thing called medical movement therapy? So we have to go back a wee way into my own personal story here, which I'll try and keep not too overwhelming for you. And then we'll move into a little bit of how that led into the development of this program. So essentially it started for me in my mid to late teens. I was dealing with some autoimmune dysregulation problems and basically was suffering from asthma, really aggressive eczema, chronic fatigue, and pretty deep depression. And so ultimately speaking, that was not a great way to be sort of functioning in a young body. And unfortunately, my experience of the biomedical model up to that point had been pretty much just lather me with steroids and drugs. And to be fair, that was making me feel like a pretty old man. So what I started to do was I started to investigate medicine. Okay, I've got a complex disease, no one seems to be able to treat it, and ultimately speaking, if I don't do something about this myself, nothing's going to happen. So I started to look into things like meditation, breath work, yoga, martial arts, and sort of started thinking, okay, maybe we can do something to get me healthy that doesn't require all this medication. So this is, 25 years or so ago now. Moving forward a little bit, as I was going through that investigation, what I call my smorgasbording phase, I was basically doing multiple different styles of Tai Chi. I was learning yoga techniques and sort of just dipping my toe in a lot of different things. I was standing in a martial arts class, and we had a teacher come in who I still to this day have no idea who he was. And he introduced us to this thing called 5-element Qigong. And I'd never really come across anything like this before. The movements were very slow. They were very gentle compared to some of the other more sort of challenging things I was doing with my body, like yoga. It was very much guided by the use of breath, which sort of struck me as an asthmatic and a person with lots of immune problems that this might be a good thing. And we did about a half-hour practice in the class. And essentially what happened to me is it felt like it basically lifted a veil off my eyes and I could just see the whole world in a completely different way. It was quite a profound experience. I had an immense sense of stillness, which I'd never experienced before. I had breath moving through my body. I could really feel the breath actually getting into my tissues, and this was just astounding to me. I'd never really come across breath work that had this level of impact on my health and well-being. The next day after that class, I woke up and I was like, this is really interesting. I need to go and find out what this is all about. So I went down to the library and found some rusty old books, sort of translated from Chinese into English, that talked a little bit about things called Dao Yin and Qigong and what they call Sheng Yang, cultivating or nourishing your life. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And they had these really awesome maps of all these dots all over the body. And I was like, what on earth is that? Come on, I got no idea what this is about. So I started looking into what they call the Jinglo, the channel networks, and how these movements might exercise these networks. And to start off with, it was very, very focused just within that Chinese medical model. And what I discovered was that this type of movement therapy has actually been around for probably around about 5,000 years. It probably started with, say, shamanistic dance rituals, something along those lines. Then fighting skills for self-protection and self-care, and slowly over time probably got quite heavily influenced by things like Taoism and Buddhism and Tibetan medicine, and we start to sort of see these interventions becoming more and more about health and well-being. We skip forward to around about a 305,000 year mark, and we see a text coming up called the Huangdi Neijing. And in this text, they basically describe the anatomy of the body, so they had a pretty good idea of where all the organs were. They describe all these collaterals, channels, and networks that run through all the body. And so, they were dissecting people and looking at the body. And they were creating these exercise programs to manipulate and regulate these structures that they were looking at. And I found this absolutely fascinating. So as I was doing my own research, I became very interested in the whole process, and this led me to bumping into a guy called Adorjala Musa Olatunji. So we call him Tunji for short. He's my late teacher who I studied and mentored under and worked for around about 20 years. So I had a very long and amazing relationship with him. And the story basically goes that I was dating a girl and she went up to this acupuncture school, which I had no idea even existed, and had written my number down as the next of kin. Someone had knocked her out in the clinic putting a needle in, and I got a phone call down at work saying, your girlfriend's passed out, can you come and pick her up? So I went up to this place called the New Zealand School of Acupuncture and Traditional Chinese Medicine. And this just blew me away. I didn't even know this place existed. They had a terrible advertising campaign at the time. And in there was this huge Afro-American Nigerian guy, 6'5" in all directions, sitting me down and telling me about why people faint when you put needles in them. And I sort of said to him, hey, look, I'm actually really good at doing Tai Chi. I've been practicing this stuff for years and, I'm quite interested in it. And he sort of stroked his beard and smiled a little bit and said, well, come on through and show me your form. So we went in through to one of the practice rooms that they had set up at the time, and I think I was a 19-year-old at this point, maybe turning 20. And I started to do the first movement of this form. My arms went up and down, and I got about halfway through that and he stopped me and he was just like, nope, that's terrible. Which was a little bit of a burst to my ego because I did think I was doing pretty good with my Tai Chi practice. But I realised pretty much straight away that this guy had another level of understanding about this, and certainly the air of his persona was very, very overwhelming. He proceeded to show me some Tai Chi, the Yang Cheng Fu 108 form. And to this point in my life, I'd actually never seen a Tai Chi master do Tai Chi before. So it was the first time I'd actually witnessed this take place. And there was a palpable feeling in the room. It was like sticky molasses everywhere. Just the way that he was moving was so dense and powerful, but yet light and smooth, and it just encapsulated everything that I was sort of excited about and looking forward to in my own personal training. At this point, he just said to me, look, if you want to do this properly, you need to do it well, and I'm going to suggest you come and train with me. So it took me about a year to organise my bits and pieces, and then I started my training at the school. I went through the first couple of years doing Tai Chi, Qigong, and what's called Tuina, which is Chinese bone setting and massage techniques, and learning acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and biomedicine. As I got to the end of my second year of that, in the summer holidays, Tunji rings me up and he says, I want you to teach the Qigong diploma. And ultimately, at the bright age of 22, just coming out of my first proper medical qualification, I thought, no way, I'm not ready for that. So I said, no, I'm not keen on taking that level of responsibility on. And he just sat there quietly on the other end of the phone and said, Peter, this is not something that you have a choice about. You're just going to do this. So he refused my no, which was just one of the greatest things that I've learned in my life from Tunji is finding opportunity even if you don't think it's right for you. And I certainly did not see that opportunity that was glaringly obvious that he offered me there. So I came back into the school and I was still studying, and then I started teaching Tuina, Qigong, and Tai Chi. So medical movement therapy, but pretty focused on the traditional Chinese medical model. And what happened there was that Tunji was like, you need mentoring, and I'm going to give you a couple of teachers. And I want to briefly call out these two other teachers because they had a significant impact on how I've helped to myself to develop this medical movement therapy program. So firstly, he introduced me to Dr. Stephen Yan, who is a Chinese acupuncturist, ear, eyes, nose and throat surgeon, and an amazing martial artist, just absolutely incredible. I mentored under him for 13 years after that point and learnt a system called Yin Yang Bapan, which is a very rare system of martial art that comes out of China. He mentored me very, very closely. I trained with him twice a week, every week, and it was the real Mr. Miyagi stuff. I had to go in, I'd pay him $40, clean his fish tank, give him a massage, and then he'd basically make me stand in weird postures for about 3 years and face the wall. And this went on and on and on and on, and the training just continued to develop and to develop. He was one of the first people that actually sort of pointed out to me that Chinese medicine is neuroscience. He would often name the nerves that he was needling under rather than pressure point names, and sort of encouraged me to realize that we're influencing the anatomy of the body in these movements and with these implements that we're using like needles. The other teacher that Tunji put me under is Dr. Peter Cowie, who I still work with now, and who's the abbot of the Forest Rock Monastery School. And he is the person who actually taught me the primary system that I continue to practice every day, which I sort of consider as my secret sauce. This is the Qigong system that I do every single morning without fail, and have done so since my early 20s. These teachers really influenced me to realize that movement and breath was a super powerful way of exercising your internal natural medical system. You know, just like instead of taking drugs, you're going to take breath work. So I went through that training and I started doing the teaching. And this is really where we move into the development of these systems. One of the great things about teaching is that people ask you questions, and quite commonly you may not have the answer for that. So I was steeped in this world of mysterious movement, traditional Taoist Qigong practices, utilizing these systems for my own health and well-being, and now I found myself in clinics treating people with movement therapy, acupuncture and Tuina, and teaching. And this is where things started to get a little bit clunky in the context of communication and language. Things like this, we would do a movement, opening the chest and coming back, and the traditional text would say that this would be for the hand Tai Yin and hand Xiao Yin channels, and therefore the lung and the heart. And I was like, well, what does that actually mean? And a lot of the students would commonly say, how does this impact the heart? How does this work on the lungs? And unfortunately, the answer I had at the time was, because that's what my teacher told me. So that led to the investigation. I started really looking into what are we actually doing with Qigong? How's it actually working? I need to be able to answer these questions, and maybe if I can understand the mechanism of Qigong, medical movement therapy better, then we might be able to harness it better and use it in our clinics and classes and in our communities in a more targeted fashion. So to do this, I had to start investigating neuroanatomy and neuroscience. How does the nervous system and the tissues of the body work? And what are the correlations between those things and what we're doing inside Qigong practice? During this research, what I isolated was that there are 4 main areas that these traditional movement therapy programs focus on. And if we could highlight those 4 areas and investigate them separately, then we can start to understand exactly what they do. So this brings us to what we now call the 4 neural regulating methods, or the 4 regulating methods. These are posture, breath, mind, and movement. All Qigong systems that I learned all had aspects of postural integration, standing still. We would often at the start of the class stand in Baldrung Shu like this for half an hour. That's an amazing thing to do for your nervous system, consistently refining your posture. All of the systems had an orientation of some type of breath work. I was blown away by the different types of breathing techniques there were, just an absolute plethora of them. Interestingly, one of the other areas that was quite unique specifically to the systems that I inherited from my teachers was the use of mind control. And this can be broken down into many different areas. Everything from, say, attentional awareness, focusing on, say, a sound or a colour or an area of your body, right through to emotional effect training, learning how to control your thinking processes, learning how to process and move through emotions in a relaxed and smooth way. And there was just a plethora of information in that area. The other component is movement. They all had some type of movement associated with it. Even the most subtle techniques like microcosmic orbit meditations, where we were sitting and just doing breathing techniques, inside that there were small positionings of the tongue that had to be made, little movements of the cranial nerves in the neck or the tailbone, or lifting and pumping the perineum. So a real variety of different movement applications as well. And so over the years, as I've been working with this, I've been able to research these areas quite extensively. And one of the reasons why I've been able to do that is my work as a clinician and a teacher. So as I said before, as a teacher, we'd often get questions that would require me to research and come up with an answer. So that was a really great way of learning, and I wanted people to be able to communicate what they're doing with Qigong with biomedical language and modern neuroanatomy where possible. The other side of that, though, is clinical practice. Conveniently, over my entire career, I've always had a clinic open, and this has allowed me to treat thousands and thousands of people and multiple different conditions. And one of the things I decided really early on in the piece was the systems and practices that I learned were too complex. One of my training programs took me nearly 13 years to get through the curriculum. So this is not the sort of stuff that your average client is going to take on. So I started creating little prescriptions that I could utilize out of these different movement therapeutic systems. So a good example is what's called the 18 breath skills, Shibashu. It's one of the modern medical systems of movement therapy that came out of China, specifically was utilized in stroke rehabilitation, but it has wide-ranging applications. But I found that 18 movements is quite a lot for someone to use, whereas maybe 1 or 2 movements could be significantly impactful for the condition that they have. And so over the years in clinic, I started creating all these little prescriptions of movement and breath work, mind control techniques that I would give to the clients to help them in their health and well-being. And we've utilized these movement therapy programs from everything from, say, neurodegenerative diseases like, say, Parkinson's, right through to rehabbing traumatic injuries, blunt force traumas, those sorts of things. In that context, as I've been able to use the application of movement therapy, there's a couple of really key things that I started to understand about the benefit of it and how it works. And one of the key things that came from that was my understanding of neural plasticity. Your brain can change from birth to death, and there are many ways that we can manipulate this. Some of the best ways that we know from a neuroscience perspective is simply habit, behavior, and environment. And this really struck me because Qigong requires habitual practice. You actually do have to do it every day for it to be beneficial. The more you do, the better it works for you in the context of dosage. But also, as I said, many of the systems were quite complex, and so shortening them up, making them a little bit more simple, meant that people could repeat the same movement over and over and over. And what I discovered was that these movements are essentially creating what I call a bioelectric signature. We're manipulating our nervous system through posture, breath work, mind control and movement, and we're creating specific neural signatures that regulate the nervous system and rehabilitate it back to health. And over the years, I've learnt to focus the technique to the dysfunctional tissue structure. So let's say, for example, in depression, we might see certain regions of the brain and the nervous system are not communicating and working well. So then I started to look at what those systems are and how can we impact those systems with things like posture. So a good example is, what's the depression posture? You probably all know it. It's this one. You're hollow, weak in the chest, the voice is often quite quiet, you can't hear them, always looking down, heavy, lethargic. Well, that's actually got a postural signature to it, and we need to rehabilitate that postural signature. So one of the first things I like to tell my depression clients as an example is lively head top. Just lift up at the top, pull up, and look up. Enjoy the view, as Tunji used to always say to us as when we were practicing. So little things like learning how to adjust postural integration can significantly change how we feel, our mood and how our body feels. This goes the same for certain types of breath work. You can improve your heart rate variability and bring in a parasympathetic event which calms your nervous system, but you can actually go the other way too. You can actually upregulate your adrenaline, get your heart really pumping, and essentially arouse your nervous system. And the different breathing techniques can be utilized in multiple different ways depending on the pre-existing status of the nervous system. So this has led to really what we have now, which is our medical movement therapy programs and the targeted disease-specific exercise programs. Many of these do need to be taught in clinic. The reality is something like, say, post-concussion syndromes. These do require quite specific types of movement attributes, specific types of eye movements and breath techniques to rehab that particular dysfunctional neural signature. But there are also pathways that we can utilize that are far, far more generalized than that. And one of the ones that we're going to look at today is the respiratory vagus nerve stimulation mechanism. I've put a real emphasis on this particular type of neural signature because of its wide-ranging impacts across multiple different areas of health and well-being. So we've advertised this to you as emotional state and nervous system optimization, and we're really targeting things like anxiety, depression, stress management, and sleep. Because the reality is those things are interwoven into many different types of diseases, and we can biohack those things by utilizing these respiratory vagus nerve stimulations. So before we go into that, let's just do a quick little overview of what we've got here. So firstly, the history. Essentially what we've done is we've taken a 5,000-year-old movement system that's been consistently practiced right throughout history. We've looked at the traditional techniques through my training in the Forest Rock School, through the Wu Dao, and through my training with Olatunji, and learned all these traditional systems. We've taken those traditional systems and dissected them. And as we've dissected them, we've found that posture, breath, mind training and movement are the primary qualities that are inherently found within every single one of these systems. Then, over many years of clinical practice and teaching this in classes all around the world, what I've found is that we can actually look at this purely from a 21st century neuroscientific mindset and describe all the phenomena that we find in Qigong practice with these mechanisms. Once we understand what those mechanisms are, then we can steer those mechanisms more directly to impact the health and well-being of our nervous system. So over those years, it's been a really long and slow development, and we've pulled in all different parts of research to create these modalities for you. But one of the areas that I'm specifically very interested in is the bioelectric signatures that we can generate with our posture, breath, mind, and movement. And one of the big signatures that we can look into that has a significant amount of research available to us is what's called respiratory vagus nerve stimulation. So let's have a wee look at what this is, get a little bit geeky just for a couple of minutes, do a wee bit of sciencey stuff, just so you can sort of get a feel for how this might work. I'll talk a little bit about the application, why we want to utilize respiratory vagus nerve stimulation, how do we generate it, and we're going to do a little overview of some of the knock-on effects, what we call the biofeedback mechanisms that this particular type of breath work creates. So firstly, what is it? So what happens is that a lot of the movements that we're utilizing have a particular type of breathing technique. And essentially what happens is we're going to be taking an in-breath and a long, slow out-breath. And what we find is that given time, when we set a rhythm with our breathing, it creates a mechanism called respiratory cardiovascular synchronization. And what that essentially means is that your lungs and heart learn to work together in a rhythmic fashion that will help to bring more oxygen and nutrients into our bloodstream, and it will have a wide variety of effects on this vagus nerve. So the general thing to understand here is that respiratory vagus nerve stimulation is generated by creating rhythmic breathing patterns. Those rhythmic breathing patterns generate an effect called respiratory cardiac synchronization, and that's going to improve a thing called heart rate variability. So when you take a long, slow breath in, essentially your heart speeds up just a little bit, and then when you breathe out, it slows down a little bit. And we want to sync that up with our breath work. More heart rate variability, the better that your heart can do that, has a direct impact on the vagus nerve. We think it takes somewhere around about 14 minutes of breath work to generate this event in the nervous system. And for those of you that are already on our program, you'll know and will have heard me say this, that's only 1% of your day. Give me 1% of your day to do movement and breath therapeutics and see how resetting your nervous system on a daily basis improves your mental, emotional well-being and your overall health status. So one of the things I mentioned before is that these techniques that we're utilizing in particular movements, breath and mind control and postural integrations are creating a neurological signature, a cascade of mechanisms that take place inside our nervous system. And one of the sort of easy ones to get our heads around, this goes super deep and really complex, but one of the easiest ones is this. We do our 1% a day of practice, we get the heart rate variability moving. Once that heart rate variability is going, this is going to improve the tone of the vagus nerve, which plays a huge role in many, many different functions in our body. But one of the big things it does is it regulates the balance between what's called the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. Okay? So we're going to target the balance between these. So the parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest, restoration, conservation mechanism. It's how our body gets into a nice, calm, relaxed state. We salivate, we feel hungry, I can relax and go to sleep. So basically the opposite of stress. Yep. The other side of that balance in the nervous system is the sympathetic nervous system. This is involved with arousal and movement, often called the flight and fight mechanism, which I always say fright instead of fight, so if I do that, just laugh at me. And what we start to find is that these two systems need to be in a homeostatic balance. But unfortunately, they're generally not. So we see, for example, in stress mechanisms, say like anxiety, overstress, not sleeping, we see an elevated sympathetic nervous system and therefore a depressed or inhibited parasympathetic nervous system. And very importantly, this can lead to a multitude of other problems in your nervous system. This means more inflammation, less oxygenation of the bloodstream. It means poor heart rate variability. So this can lead to things like hypertension, as an example. We see this in stress and mood-related disorders, digestive disorders, cardiac respiratory disorders. The list really goes on as to how the sympathetic nervous system, when out of whack, can start to really impact our health and well-being. So we're doing our 1% a day, we're getting our respiratory vagus nerve stimulation taking place, we're improving heart rate variability, and in doing that, we start to see this taking place. The parasympathetic system starts to upregulate. This will inhibit any elevated sympathetic nervous system, and we want those to be in balance. So neither of them are good or bad, but they most certainly need to work in a cohesive, healthy fashion with each other. Now, what we call this is neural regulation. So you're going to hear that term come up in my courses quite a lot, because essentially you're creating a neurological signature through posture, breath, mind, and movement exercise that is balancing the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. That then has what I call a cascade of mechanisms that move through the body. So essentially these two systems are part of what's called the autonomic nervous system. So this is all your automated functionality that you don't have to think about, but unfortunately, it does get out of balance because of lifestyle, habits, behavior, environment, all sorts of stuff. We're going to create a neural regulating effect on the autonomic nervous system that's going to generate what we call homeostasis. Essentially, your nervous system wants to be in this thing called homeostasis, balance. Everything, just the checks and balances, all working really well and smoothly together. When the autonomic nervous system goes into this nice homeostatic balance and we start to alter the neurochemistry of the body, sympathetic nervous system, things like cortisol, and adrenaline, which can be great for moving around, but out of check, we start to see the suppression of nice inhibitory things like acetylcholines and GABA, which are all chemistry that our brain needs to function properly. So by regulating this system, we bring that neural chemistry into balance, hence why we call it neural regulation. Once that autonomic nervous system's getting into a nice balanced sort of status, somewhere between maybe 14 to 20 minutes inside your respiratory vagus nerve practice, then the knock-on effect really gets interesting, and we could do a whole thesis just in this bit. It comes up to a thing that's called the can. the central autonomic network. This is a series of intercommunications between different regions of the brain. So an example would be the sort of midbrain area, like the limbic system, communicating up into the cortical structures of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex. And when we get that neural regulatory effect on the central autonomic network, then we're going to see what we call neuromodulation taking place. This is the regulation and production of neural chemistry and neural communication. How different parts of the brain communicate with each other to create specific neural signatures, and how we can modulate the chemistry that's involved in achieving that. And that's when we start to see the knock-on effect to things like mental health, because mental health is a problem that is specifically orientated in what we call the central nervous system. So if we can target the central nervous system to work well, regulate the peripheral nervous system to function properly, we're going to generate an amazing neural signature that has effects that regulate the nervous system and modulate the nervous system, and that leads to rehabilitate the nervous system. And I've had the joy of being able to watch this event take place in many people's lives over my career. And one of the things that leads us to being here today is we want you to do this too. Ultimately speaking, my time is pretty tight, so it's really good if we can create programs like this where you can learn the basics and benefit from these interventions that I've inherited through my training, down through the lineages that I've been involved with, and then of course just sort of tidying it up with a little bit of neuroscience as well. So that's just a wee overview of respiratory vagus nerve stimulation. Obviously, there's a lot of language here that if you have no experience of biomedicine is going to be a little bit over your head. But I would really indicate that understanding how the nervous system works a little bit can be a really good thing to know. You know, people that suffer from, say, panic attacks, they can often feel them coming on or building up long before they actually take place. And if they know that this is because this part of the nervous system is starting to ring the alarm bells, your nervous system saying to the world, am I safe? And then you want it to say back, yes, I am. When that's not taking place, you can intervene. You can bring a respiratory vagus nerve stimulation in, and you can reset the nervous system. But that brings me back a little bit to what we were talking about before, which is neuroplasticity. Habit, behavior, and environment is critical. And one of the things that I learned in my traditional training about Sheng Yang, nourishing life, was that these practices were designed to be done daily. So I think that we have to use Qigong or medical movement therapy much like what we do with food. It's a nutrient that you're taking in, and you need to take it in once a day, or maybe even more than that. I often say this in clinic, you know, breath is the best vitamin that you can take, and nobody utilizes it. It's free, and we've got lots of it. So we can really actually utilize this neuroplasticity, but to get the effect to cascade and for it to be efficient does require a bit of discipline. We do need to actually show up for ourselves on a daily basis for your own health and well-being. And this has been something that I've really encouraged in my work in the clinic over the year. I often say to my clients, I actually don't want to see you, which sounds like a poor business model, but ultimately speaking, I want them to get well, get out of my clinic, and utilize self-care. You do need to nourish your own life, and you do need to nourish your own well-being, and I would highly encourage a daily practice to make that take place. So, bit of an overview. We've done a wee whack of history. Obviously, I've been told by people the story is interesting, so happy to share that with you. The development, really looking into how we've used clinical environments, neuroscientific research, combined that with the tradition that we've inherited from our masters over the generations, and we've created an application to be able to share this with more and more people around the world and to get this system working for our health and well-being. We're utilizing mechanisms like the respiratory vagus nerve stimulation. This is only one of many mechanisms that are spoken about in our courses, but certainly a big one in the context of mental health and well-being. Yep. And we've packed that into a nice online therapy product for you. What I want people to do with this online product is essentially create a daily practice. The respiratory vagus nerve stimulation system that I've created is one of the prescriptions I've been utilizing in my clinics for nearly 20 years now. It involves 5 movements. Each one of those movements has a specific neurological signature that influences the nervous system in a particular fashion to neuroregulate, neuromodulate, and neurorehabilitate your nervous system back into health. These movements are simple and easy to learn. There is a depth there that really just can't be taught specifically online in a course like that, but these online sessions that we're going to be doing is going to be an opportunity for us to go a little bit deeper. I've also packaged that in 2 different ways for you guys to utilize. I've got a beginner's version of it, which might be more for our clients that are here with us, or if you're a physician that you can refer on to your patients as well. And I don't bore you with the neuroscience in that one. So what we've got in there is really just focusing on the doing. Because at the end of the day, it is a physical application. It does require you to do it. It doesn't work if you don't. Just like taking medicine, if you don't take it, it doesn't do anything. So same with this. If you want respiratory vagus system stimulations to work, you do actually have to practice them. The second part of that is we've packaged up an advanced version of this for you to utilize as well. And this is really for people who think, you know what, I want to know more about the nervous system. I do want to know what respiratory vagus nerve stimulation is. And I want to go a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more about how I can utilize this and how these movements work. The other group that I'm looking to really nourish with this is our Qigong students. So everyone around the world that's joined us here today, you know, the reality is your Qigong that you're doing, the tradition that you've inherited through the Daoyin and the Chinese medicine, the Shangyang practices, we can understand that phenomena with neuroscience. And we can describe exactly how it works and why it works, and we can enhance its efficiency by understanding and knowing that. So knowledge is power when it comes to Qigong, and certainly it's a really good thing to go a little bit deeper and sort of understand how it affects your anatomy. Finally, those people that maybe are referring physicians or practitioners who are utilizing this stuff in their clinics, I would like you to have a deep understanding of how movement therapy works so that when you give this to your patients, you can describe the mechanisms and you can help guide them through the process of learning this, which we do have embedded in our website, of course, but ultimately speaking, practicing together is a lovely thing, which we're going to do shortly. So we've got a nice couple of products there for you. Our 4 regulating methods, which talks a little bit about the foundation of medical movement therapy. We are going to be running very in-depth courses on 4 regulating methods as we go forward. And our respiratory vagus nerve stimulation mechanism to enhance emotional state and your nervous system optimization for health and well-being. So ultimately, what I'm wanting us to get from this little chat today is just a wee bit of a feel for where this comes from, how we're utilizing it in our clinics, how I'd like you to utilize these products in your own clinics or in your own life and in your own daily practice, which is the theme for today. And I thought what could be quite nice to maybe round up the talk and to give us an experience of this is to look at one of the movements out of the respiratory vagus nerve stimulation system, practice it together for a little while, and then finish the meditation in silence, which is a really good thing to practice in your own daily life. So the movement that we're going to do is called nature's fragrance. It comes from a system called the 18 breath skills, and this system has multiple different movements that target the different tissues of the body in a variety of different fashions. But the prescription that we've created is specifically for this respiratory vagus nerve stimulation mechanism, and this movement actually introduces you to the anatomy of the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve comes out of the cranium, out of the skull, it surfaces into your ears, which any of you that have been in my clinic have had those electrocuted guaranteed, and then we feel it come down through the neck and into the chest, and then it goes into your heart, your lungs, your stomach, your spleen, your pancreas, your liver, your reproductive and digestive system, and extends right through the whole body. So the trunk of the body, in the context, I used to call it the wandering nerve. It's almost like a tree that branches out with roots right through the whole system, hence why it has such a huge impact on multiple different aspects of the nervous system, particularly the autonomic nervous system and the central autonomic network, which we're targeting for this particular mechanism. So let's go through that now. I'm just going to move the camera out so you can see my whole body. And what I'm going to encourage you guys to do, for those of you that can stand up, please do. I know some people may not be able to do that, so this can be done seated as well. How I'm going to run this part of the class is we're going to go into the movement. We'll do it about 15 to 20 times. I want you to just really tune into your body before you start. And then when you finish, I'm going to shut this down without saying goodbye. And the reason for that is I love finishing my classes in silence. So the little game that I want you to play is this. Let's go through the movement. We'll organise our posture, our breath rate. We'll do the movement. When we finish, I'm just going to bow out and I'm just going to leave you. And what I want you to do is I don't want you to speak. Zip it up, throw the key away, and I'd like you to hold on to your words and remain in silence until the next time you eat. Just give it a go. It might be 10 minutes, it could be 2 hours, it could be later this afternoon. Test yourself to see if you can spend a period of time in silence after doing this meditation, because one of the great things that we want to really work with when we're trying to bring our body into a homeostatic balance is a mechanism called the default mode network. And this is a state that our brain gets into when we're restful and quiet, when we're not focusing on the future or the past, and we're being purely present. And my experience is that when we're talking, we're generally not present. So I'm going to really encourage a little bit of silence after the lesson today. Feedback will be great. So you can make comments, obviously, in the chat room here. I'll be able to see all those after the class, which will be really cool, and just sort of hear what you guys have been talking about. You can also just join our online community at Neuromedtec on Facebook. Ask us any questions in there. I'm happy to answer those and communicate with you in that environment as well. We're going to have a few more of these coming up, looking at posture, looking at breath, looking at mind quality and movement specifically over the next few months. So I'm hoping to really help build our little community, our understanding of the 4 regulating methods, and how we can apply these techniques to rehabilitate your nervous system back into health. Okay, let's get into it and round it down a little bit. So I'm just going to bring the camera back a wee way. Awesome. And I'll just bring this mic away a little bit and get things out of the way. Awesome. That'll do. Hopefully you guys can see my whole body there, which is good. And I'll just get these out of the road as well. Okay, let's just get ourselves comfortable. Everyone standing up if you can, please. And we'll go through a little bit of postural alignment, and then we'll sink into the movement. We're going to probably repeat it for maybe about 3 to 5 minutes or so. And then, as I suggested, I'd love you to have a period of quietness afterwards and really tune in to how this feels inside your nervous system. Okay, so let's start with our feet together. And we'll bring the right foot out to a 90-degree angle. Step once to the end of the toe line and then halfway across. So we're sort of around about shoulder width apart. Your feet are parallel, so they're straight like you're standing on railway tracks, which I see every day in clinic is incorrect, so get that right, save yourself a hip replacement, and bend your knees. Feel the weight across the top of the knee a little bit, and coil the hips forwards and outwards to create a down-bearing and sticky sensation into the ground. Relax your belly, tuck your bum in a little bit so your back's nice and straight. Hollow your chest a little bit so it's nice, relaxed and humble, and draw the shoulders out to the walls a little bit, round the elbows, relax your hands. Just let them hang. We call it a yin-yang palm, so nice, not tight, not empty, just halfway. Perfect. Now we're going to lift up the perineum, the space between the anus and genital region. Tuck the chin a little bit. Connect your teeth, tongue on the palate behind your teeth, and lift up at the top of the head. Remember, lively head top, change your posture, change your depression. Perfect, that's what we want to do, right? Cool, so our feet are shoulder width apart, parallel. Our knees are bent, the hips are tucked down a little bit at the back, the belly's relaxed, just let it all hang out. We're not scared of a good beer belly. Just nice, relaxed chest, shoulders out, elbows out, hands relaxed. Lifting the center line, so pull up at the perineum, tuck the chin, lift up at the top of the head, standing up nice and tall. Okay, now that we're naturally standing, I'll get you to take a big deep breath. So you breathe in and breathe out. Good, you want to breathe in and out of the nose, nice and quietly. Beautiful. As you're breathing, you want to feel your abdomen expanding front and back. And to the sides, breathing in, out to the sides, and in. Good. The breathing needs to be long, slow, smooth, and continuous. Couple of big deep breaths. As you're breathing, quieten your mind. As the thoughts come up, just simply chop them off. Yes, no, not worth thinking about. Yes, a good thought that I'm going to hold on to for later. No, a negative thought that I don't need in my mind. Chop it off, cancel that. Not worth thinking about. Why am I thinking about the grocery shopping when I'm trying to do Qigong? Let's focus, get present. Just using judgment to bring your thoughts into a nice, natural state of observation. Just observing your postural integration, observing your breath rate, and relaxing. Good. Let's go into the movement now. So starting with the palms facing the ground, like a nice round circle over the top. Turn the palms around, breathe in and lift your hands up. Wash your face and breathe out, bringing your hands down along the neck and all the way back down to face the ground. And squat a little bit. So we breathe in, grasp the toes, lift our height up, wash the face, breathe out, bend the knees and sit down. Breathing in, lifting, expand the abdomen. Breathing out, press the feet, bend the knees and sit a little bit. Breathe in and out. Good, nice and easy. Let's do a few nice and quietly together. Okay, 3 more times. Last one. Bring your hands down. Hold them over your abdomen. Stand quietly. Observe how your body, posture, your breath, your mind quality. Note how it feels different. And remain in this state of natural observation. Presence within awareness. And remembering to remain silent until your next meal.